start recording. And Jeremy, I'm making you host.
Charlie, I'm over here.
All right, I'm going to call over if that's okay. What do I do?
Charlie, I stopped sharing. That's why you're not seeing any kind of slides right
I was
now.
wondering, I went back to the Zoom thing, or, I don't know if I screwed up the screen or not.
I'll get you set up.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
I'm not too smart, and I thought I was unmuting myself, and I was thinking my screen is, sorry.
One day we'll have a real meeting. Once
Well,
again.
I'm not too bright, that's all.
No.
Perfect.
Confuses anybody. All right, I think you're good. I think it's unmuted and everything for you too.
Oh, it is good, okay,
Yep.
great. Thank you too, buddy. Oh, yeah, great.
No problem.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry I was running a few minutes late. This is a, special meeting of the City of Charleston Planning Commission. We're basically just this meeting is all designed to review the final draft of the Charleston City Plan. And, since we're meeting by Zoom, I'm announcing the members of the Planning Commission. They are appointed by City Council, they're volunteers, and I know you all join me in thanking them for their work. Mr. Jimmy Bailey, Ms. Laquita Bryant Jenkins, Ms. Erica Harrison, Ms. Donna Jacobs, Ms. Angie Johnson, Sunday Lenthesis, Harry Lassane, who's the Vice Chairman, Sean Flug, and myself, Charlie Carish. So today we're going to have a presentation of the drafted city plan by staff, and then we will have, I think, some public comments that Chloe will introduce to us. So, Mr. Morgan, if you want to introduce anybody from the staff, that's great. Otherwise, you go ahead and get started.
Sure. So just so everybody knows, some of the faces that have been working so hard on this plan document, I think most of you all know them, but just for the public to know, obviously our staff consists, as I see them aligned on the Hollywood squares here in front of us. I've got Philip Overcash, our senior planner, who's been working on lots of this, and you'll be hearing from today. Jim Hemphill, who is a planner in the office, our newbie. He's been with us a little bit more than a year. Chloe Stuber, who is a planner in the office as well. And we're missing one of our key staff, Eric Pullman, who is on a well-deserved vacation this week, but I'll be covering for him and his sections of the plan. And everybody's going to be talking about their own sections of the plan. We're going to kind of go through it from the start. We aren't going to obviously do every single page, but we're going to go through the key elements and let you all give comments. You know, this is going to be a very informal kind of workshop. If you all see something that comes up on the screen or you hear some comments that you have a question about or want to add to, please by all means do so. It might be helpful for you to do the raise your hand feature just so we can see you, because we're going to obviously have a split screen here as we go through this document. We're real excited to share it with you all. Obviously you all saw, you know, what we sent you over the weekend, and it's continuing to get further refined, but the text and the recommendations and the maps, things like that are all obviously the same. We're still cleaning up some graphics and items like that for the final document. But
Chris, let me just chime in one time, and I apologize. I should have started off by thanking you and the staff for all the hours and days and probably weeks of work y'all did on this, so thank you.
Sure. Happy to do it. It's what we do. And, you know, like I said, we're really proud of what we've got together here. This is a, you know, landmark document, we think, for the city. So we're excited to have discussions on it. So I'm going to go to screen share and pull up our document. If I can find it, here we go. And this is the PowerPoint or the slides that we're going to go through. I'm going to be running them, but our different staff members are going to explain different parts. So please bear with us as we say a few next slides, please, and things like that. Anyway, I think with this image, we're going to have Chloe kind of kick us off with some of the background on how we put the whole plan together here. So Chloe.
Yes, Christopher, can you go up to view on the toolbar, click on view, and then go to full screen mode. Yeah.
Look at that. How much better?
Okay. So for all you design professionals out there, please forgive this slide. I threw this together very quickly today because I thought it was important to start with how we got to where we are today, and all that has transpired and all the different elements that have come together to make this final draft of the plan. So we did an orientation with Planning Commission in February of 2020 to kick off the city plan, and then global pandemic happened. We reconvened in June of 2020 and launched a round of engagement to gather input from the community. All at the same time, we're working with consultants on the city plan, land and water analysis, and consultants on compiling the best data we've ever had available on our housing stock. We're referencing other plan studies and reports that are mentioned in the city plan. And also staff we were conducting other research outside of the research that consultants were doing. We were also compiling data, all the while having meetings with Planning Commission almost monthly. In the winter of 2020 going into 2021, where we had wrapped up with community engagement, synthesized all of that feedback. All of those elements that you see there in that first column informed the compiling the plan, drafting, writing the plan. We put together draft future land use maps, a preliminary list of draft recommendations, and also findings from settlement community research. to bring back to the community this spring. We had another round of engagement this spring to get feedback on those core elements that we sort of prioritized to have ready to share with the public earlier on. Still continuing to write and compile all the rest of the plan. And then here we are now, many months later, with this final draft that still has work to do, as Christopher mentioned. Everywhere where you see a magenta outline, that means that the graphic is still, it needs to be created still, or is still being worked on. So there's still some graphic elements. It still needs a line edit, but for the most part, this is the final draft, and we're really excited to be here. But I wanted to show this to show how much has gone into this, all the different moving pieces, all the different voices that we hope are reflected and represented well in this plan. And it's been quite the adventure, and we're excited to be at this point. So next slide, Christopher. Okay, so I'm going to start us off with just an orientation to the document. As I mentioned, when you see the magenta outline, that means ongoing or needs to be created. Those are just placeholders for now. Next slide, Christopher. If you could, we start with acknowledgements. I'm not going to spend too much time with this. Go to next slide, Christopher. Table of contents. Okay, so this is good for orientation. So I'm going to go over introduction, process engagement really quickly. We're going to go through each of the elements, just sort of highlighting some of the key things from the narrative, and then recommendations, and then let Planning Commission guide discussion or questions and discussion for each of those as needed. And as Christopher said, each of us will be introducing different sections. This was a collaborative effort, not just with Community Voices, Planning Commission, other stakeholders, other departments and staff, but the planning division, all of us contributed. We wrote different sections of the plan, and then I helped to, or tried to, tie it all together. And so this really was a team effort with so many people involved. Okay, next slide, Christopher. Keep going. Okay, so in the introduction, we just do a little bit of education. What is a comprehensive plan? These are things that you all are very familiar with. We don't need to spend much time on this. Next, Christopher. The base map of what we're planning for. And one thing I do want to highlight in this section is the next, Christopher. We have the guiding principles, which you all have seen before, but we also, this is the first time that we've introduced sort of resilience and equity framework. So this is something that emerged throughout the planning process, and this is the first time we articulated what it was that we were doing, the things, these themes that we were threading throughout the plan process, throughout the various elements, and you'll see that wrapped up at the end in the resilience and equity recommendation matrix. Sorry, I'm having to lean in to read this type. It's a little hard to read. So the core beliefs that shape the resilience and equity framework and that are interwoven throughout the plan are, number one, communities are inherently stronger and more resilient when all have equal access to opportunities and healthy environments. Number two, there are existing disparities that deny certain communities equal access to opportunities and healthy environments and increase their vulnerability to disasters. And number three, an agenda to build resiliency of a community must begin with achieving equity, and all strategies should prioritize addressing existing disparities and protecting vulnerable communities from any unintended negative impacts. So that's again, the first time we've articulated this framework. And we can highlight how this is interwoven throughout as we go along. This is a list of all the other plans that are referenced in the city plan on the right. Next, Christopher. And this section goes over how the plan process itself and how the community was part of that. This is also the first time that you'll see the key terms. So one of the things that we've done differently with this plan is we've highlighted key terms throughout that are mentioned in each section. We'll also have a plan glossary at the end that has all of these terms in one place. And one of the reasons why we've done this is to sort of thread in some education, and also for some words that are, when left to interpretation, can have various meanings. We wanted to make sure that we were being clear about what our definitions were in terms of how they're being used in the plan. So next, Christopher. Next, oh, by the numbers, sorry, go back. This is one of the graphics being worked, no, yeah, stay here, please. Okay, this is one of the graphics that's being worked on, but we'll quickly go through these numbers. So we held 40 city-led virtual and in-person events, 18 community-led virtual and in-person events, 5 Spanish language activities, that includes both canvassing and online panels. 1,000 residents and stakeholders participated in those scheduled activities. 30% of participants had never participated in planning conversations previously. Over 2,500 responded to the City Plan Community Survey. Over 1,000 subscribed to the City Plan newsletter from its inception. And then over 17,000 people engaged independently. That's either by visiting the website, watching videos on the YouTube playlists, or responding, interacting with other content on our third-party Facebook partners. Keep going, Christopher. We've also included recommendations for engagement going forward, and this is new. And this is again sort of threading equity throughout the plan. And if we want to plan for a more equitable future, engagement needs to be a very intentional part of that. And so here are some recommendations for how we can do that. And these have been very much informed by the consulting team that we worked with to support engagement activities throughout the plan. Starting with more funding and resources for all departments to increase accessibility and promote community integration in planning and other decision-making processes, needing technology to go along with that, having more coordination across departmental efforts to outreach and do community engagement, having more resources to support English and Spanish materials and interpretation for public meetings, and strategies to ensure transparency and accountability for how we implement the recommendations in this plan. So that's one of the things that was very important to folks, was knowing how can city leaders, how can the city be held accountable to the recommendations in this plan and how we're implementing them. So making sure we're figuring out ways to be very transparent about that. So I quick pause. Christopher, Mr. Chairman, do we want to pause for discussion after each of these, or do we want to just go through and come back for discussion after public comment?
Well, I think it may be better, I mean, just in my opinion, if we focus, if we do that and we ask if there's any questions on it now, this particular section, just to me, otherwise it may be fresh in everyone's mind. Do the commission members agree, or?
I'm fine with that.
Fine with that.
Okay. So does anybody have any comments or questions, commission members, what Chloe's touched on so far? Or?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, ma'am, Ms. Jacobs.
I'm actually excited about this because that's come out through the community engagement, that education, once you start educating people or having them understand a dynamic, maybe they're not so upset with something, or they learn the process. So this is I think a nice addition here. And I know education and engagement is intertwined sometime in the use of the words, but I might even just put the word community engagements or communication and education in, just so it's very clear what we're trying to do. The clearer we get, the better we will be. Thank you.
Makes sense. Anyone else?
I'll just quickly say that, sorry about that. I'll just quickly say that I was a bit of a skeptic early on that the engagement would be successful in this environment, but I think the team has done a tremendous job and reached a ton of people. So hats off to all of you.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. I agree. There's none other. Chloe will let. Go ahead. Was there someone else?
Just going to add to what Mr. Bailey just said, and that is, I really like this recommendation that we're looking at on this page 23, because I think, as Mr. Bailey said, we were all kind of skeptical about how technology-based meetings would work, and I have been pleasantly surprised at how smoothly and well these meetings have operated, and I think that they actually expand the access of the public to what we do, and the goal of transparency. I would hope that while we all want to go back to meeting in person, and I'm excited and ready to do that when the time comes, I do hope that we will be able to continue having the public be able to access these meetings remotely. So anyway, that's just a comment, and also especially to Chloe, but to all the staff who've made the technology work on these meetings.
Thank you, Mr. Hussain. I think you're right. I think I talked to Mr. Morgan earlier about the challenge would be, like with City Council met last night, I think for the first time, but trying to also have the public engaged on Zoom too. So it's a combination of public meetings with the communications from outside. So anyone else, any comments, questions? If not, Chloe, we'll let you go ahead.
Next is one of Philip's sections.
Yes. If there are no other questions or comments regarding engagement, we'll go right into population. So this is a required element of the plan. So every plan in South Carolina includes, some aspect of describing or just going into detail about the population of their city or county or whatever the local government is. So of course, we've done this with the city plan, and it does help set a stage a little bit, goes into some background, provides some explanatory narrative, and hopefully through some great graphics that we've been working on for a while, tell a story. And, of course, a lot of what's in this section can be kind of referenced as we go through the rest of the plan. Some of that background is useful for understanding some of the other elements. So just, of course, we don't need to go word for word in this, but I'll quickly go through. First of all, just starting at the United States level, federal level, I guess, or national level. We of course have seen a lot of growth in South Carolina, one of the fastest growing cities, states in the country. And of course, Charleston is one of the biggest cities in South Carolina. So we've seen a lot of the growth that's happening in South Carolina. And this is a trend, we've seen a lot of growth in the Southeast. And a lot of folks are moving from other parts of the country to South Carolina. Next slide. So you can see in this graphic, the city of Charleston, of course, is in the context of the region, fairly small geographically, in the Tri-County region, which is considered the metro area of the city. And of course, the city, makes up, we're around 150,000 residents, but the entire Tri-County area, or the metro areas, is around 800,000 now. So we only make up, kind of that percentage of the entire area. As you can see in some of these other charts, and graphs, the rate of change in population or increase, because everybody's increasing in the Charleston region. The city of Charleston actually, based on this graph from 2010 to 2020, increased at a little bit lower rate than some of the other places in the region, especially some of the kind of more suburban or outer parts of the city, such as Hanahan and Somerville. And a lot of that growth has been driven by folks migrating to the area, both within South Carolina and from other states. The pie graph is just a very quick visual representation of what type of growth has been occurring. And that's it's been mostly people coming here rather than sort of the natural increase of births and, calculated, based on births and deaths. Real quick, first, the one other graph here we see is population change by area. And as you can see, the peninsula is actually growing again. Our last plan indicated we were starting to see a little bit more residential and residential construction and a little bit of population growth on the peninsula. But for many decades, the peninsula had been declining in population. And that has turned around and is increasing now year after year, although not at a tremendous rate. And of course, West Ashley continues to be our largest population-wise. And then Johns Island and Cane Hoy saw the largest increases percentage-wise. Of course, they still are the smallest in population of all the areas of the city, but as far as growth, they are growing the fastest. Next slide. And this chart obviously indicates that, the fastest growing parts of the city are Johns Island and the Cane Hoy Peninsula. We could probably go right on to the next slide. As you can see, the graph on the left indicates, kind of what kind of over 100 years, actually, since 1920, kind of what the population rates look like. And as you can see, starting around 1980, we saw a pretty good trend upwards, and excuse me, and still going up. The line that you see on this graph is a indicator of population density. That's persons per square mile. And as you can see, as the city grew, population-wise, our density actually went down, and it has kind of remained somewhat level for the past few decades. Let's see, one of the things that has come out of an analysis of population and demographics with the city is the indicator of the trends indicating change in the city, whether it's pure increase in population or change in demographics such as the race, age, or some other demographic category. We did see, as you can see on the upper right graph, we actually need to show the legend there, but this graph is indicating a Black versus white population. And as you can see, well, the orange is Black population, which has remained, even with the population growth in the city over the years, over the decades, the Black population has remained steady, while the white population has increased since around the 1980 decade. And this is indicating that we are losing some diversity in the city by having the ratio of the different races in the city kind of diverge a little bit. And next slide. And I think we only have one or two more. And this one also is looking at Black and white population and some of the change that we've seen, at least, and also more recently since 2010. What kind of change, at least according to census data, or more specifically American Community Survey data, which is annual data that comes out on a kind of a smaller sample basis every year. And then on the right, this is something you've seen, I think, a few times. It's now been updated from 2010 to, it was a 2010 to 2018 data, but we've got the most recent data available, and that's 2019 now. And there hasn't been much change in here, although there is a little bit increase of the wage gap between Blacks and whites in the city. And that is more or less a run through of population. Of course, if you have any comments or questions, be happy to dig down a little bit further.
Any questions of Mr. Overcash on the population? It's interesting, amazing the numbers, but anyway, we see it in traffic every day. But anybody, any questions or comments on the population?
Mr. Chairman.
Jacobs, go ahead.
Thank you. I had a bit of a discussion with staff earlier today because you'll notice there are no recommendations under this section, which you would hesitate to make those kinds of recommendations, but I think there needs to be maybe some sort of explanation as to why, and that this is mainly a data-driven section of the plan to support recommendations. So it doesn't look like it's just absent from this section. I also noticed, and this is a tiny detail, that under the paragraph of population projections, that every region was there except for West Ashley. And I don't know if that was just a typo error or something like that, but West Ashley didn't have any sort of projection under that paragraph.
Yeah, that's something that we can fix. As you can imagine, we're still seeing population growth in all of the areas of the city. I think the only one that we're not going to be seeing as much growth in is James Island. All the other areas, including West Ashley and the peninsula, will continue to see growth. And our projections are indicating it will be, about the same rate as we've been seeing the past couple of decades.
I figured that to be true. It just would be nice to be included in the list. And the last one, which, I learned today would maybe be an impossible thing to do, but it maybe warrants a bit of a discussion at least, is how did the engagement demographics match with our population demographics? In some ways, I know that data was collected, but it may not be so hard accurate that it felt like that it's appropriate for a graphic representation. But I just wanted to open that thought up at least, because I think that's important that the two somehow mirror each other. But talking with Chloe, we don't have it in such a hard form that we feel like could be represented and supported through a graphic. But I just wanted to bring that thought to an attention.
Thank you. Mr. Bailey, you had a question or comment? No, I'm sorry. Anyone else? Ms. Jacobs, good thoughts and good recommendations. Anyone else? Questions, comments?
Just
Yeah, Mr.
quick.
Chairman,
Go ahead.
just a very minor point suggestion. The previous 2 pages, the chart probably would benefit from a legend. I think you mentioned that, Philip, just so it's clear what we're looking at. It takes a little studying, particularly one on the left, to see how those 2 overlaid graphs are to be interpreted. I think, something that allows you to figure that out a little quicker would help.
Mm-hmm.
But
okay.
Both of them.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hussain. Questions? Any other questions, comments? If not,
Mr.
Chloe,
Chairman, yeah, I
Yes,
have
ma'am.
one quick comment in response to Donna's point about representation. There is a section in the process and engagement chapter that I didn't spend much time on or any time on in my presentation, but there is a section in that chapter about the representation element of the engagement efforts. As Donna suggested, we don't have enough data on the demographics of participants in all the engagement activities to be able to match that with city population and speak to that. But with what we did have available, I did try to address that in the process and engagement chapter. So welcome feedback for ways that we could highlight that better. And then the second thing I did just want to point out is at the end of the population chapter, since gentrification is really a lot about demographics and population change, this is where we've addressed that issue specifically in the plan and referenced how it's being addressed throughout other elements. And you'll see that at the end, sort of housing affordability, job growth, neighborhood support, and quality of life addressed in other chapters of this plan. So I just want to highlight that of it's introduced here, but it's addressed in other elements and recommendations for how that can be addressed or seen in other elements of the plan.
Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate it. Any other comments or questions? If not, Troy will go ahead.
All right. So this is one of my sections, natural resources, and feel free to chime in at any time. Interrupt me if you have any questions or need clarification. So this is another required element that focuses on the natural environment and green space around the city. And so here, kind of the introductory information, just outlining what the chapter is. You have some images from the Dutch Dialogues report. And then we get right into living with water, which is incorporating the Dutch Dialogues framework in our natural resources planning. So all the good things in that report in regard to incorporating water as part of our built environment and part of our natural environment, using it as an asset rather than something to overcome or kind of manipulate. So next slide, please. So I kind of give some of the guiding principles behind the Dutch Dialogues there. We talk a little bit about water quality and some of the issues related with water quality, how those can be mitigated through natural resources planning. Here is a kind of unique section of this, subsection of this section in natural resources and equity. This is not something that we looked at in our last plan, but in the spirit of the resilience and equity framework being woven throughout, we thought this was really important to include. So this is kind of introducing the idea of environmental justice and, just the kind of sharing some information from other studies about how some of the most vulnerable populations around the city are also the most exposed to things like hazmat or other extreme heat, other natural kind of elements or lack thereof. So the next section there, parks and conserved areas. Oh, sorry, can you go back one more? Yeah, this is just, an overview of our park system, talking about our Parks and Rec master plan coming up. And you can see some of the key terms there on the side, which, as Chloe said, is a new thing that we're doing for this plan. So there are a lot of key terms, a lot of kind of jargon in this section that we wanted to clear up. And next slide, please. Here, we talk about green infrastructure. So this is kind of green stormwater infrastructure, if you will. Obviously, we have tree canopies. As our tree canopy is kind of one of the big pieces of green infrastructure that is vital for the city. So it also we talk about the trees to offset stormwater study and reference figures from that. And also some research from the College of Charleston about how our tree canopy has changed over time. Here on the right, you'll see a map that was included in the land and water analysis that shows the areas of gain and loss of our tree canopy over the last 10 years. This is missing a legend, so this will be edited. And I think we are also going to try to bring this into our comprehensive plan style. So the final image will look a little bit different, but have the same information there. Next slide, please. Here, I guess, okay, yeah, so we have more of the tree canopy. These images reference wetland buffers, which is another piece of green infrastructure that we talk about, a way to kind of slow the rate of stormwater runoff and help alleviate flooding through the natural environment. Next slide, please. Here we have kind of talk about some of our other sustainability efforts going on throughout the city. And then, some other efforts that we're making to the natural environment, to improve the natural environment, and things like our rain garden, rainproof Charleston program that's going on. And then our climate action plan, which is kind of elaborated on later in the resilience section. And then over to the right, we have our natural resources recommendations. Some of the highlights here, I won't read through all of them. Some of the highlights are supporting land conservation around the edges of the urban growth boundary, and kind of highlighting some of the places that we'd like to target for conservation to kind of support the urban growth boundary. And let's see, also implementing recommendations of the trees to offset stormwater study that I referenced, which was excellent study with a lot of good stuff. That would include taking a look at our tree protection ordinance, things like that. And then number 9, I think, is also a really important one, is implementing land use and transportation planning strategies to account for future marsh migration, which is something that came out of our land and water analysis, is the need to protect these future marsh areas and plan for those, plan for that marsh to naturally expand as sea level rises. And so those are some of the highlights, and I kind of breezed through there. So please let me know if you have any questions or you want me to go back over anything.
Thank you, sir. And I tell you, it's a lot of neat and important stuff you went over, and important part of this plan. Questions, comments from commission members? If not, Ms. Jacobs, you go ahead.
You know I'm going to have something, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
No, I wait for it, and I enjoy it too. So it's usually important. So thank you.
Well, first of all, I want to highly recommend the staff for adding some emphasis to this tree to offset water program. I was very involved with that, and it rarely gets mentioned, but it's got a lot of interesting tools in it, and I'm really glad that y'all have integrated that discussion into this plan, because I think more people will see it and use it, because it really has some very helpful stuff in it. I do have, this is a mincing a word here, and this is in the recommendations in number 10 recommendation, where it says increase incentives and educational opportunities for residents to increase and maintain water retention on their properties. I have a feeling that that's going to cause people some heartburn if they feel like we're going to recommend everybody maintaining water on their properties. And it's just maybe a different, I understand the intention of that recommendation, but I think we might need to, craft the words a little better. My first thought was to manage, and I know that y'all are looking at maybe rain garden installations and rain barrels and stuff like that, but I don't want to get people really a lot of heartburn with the way that's written. We're not asking people to start building ponds on their property and stuff of that nature. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. And I think there was one other, I also would, I agree with Mr. Lassane's comment about legends and titles. I know sometimes graphics are obvious to people that build them, but when I tried to look at all the graphics, like, do I immediately understand what this graphic is in context? So I feel like a few of the graphics in here, they do have magenta around them, which suggests to us that they're not complete, but maybe a title, a word or two of context back to the narrative, because some people are visual with figures and some people visual with words. So if we can just make sure we tie them together, I think that's going to be important for people. So thank you for that opportunity to comment on that.
Thank you, Ms. Jacobs. Anyone else? If not, thank you for your work as well, Jim. I appreciate it. Chloe, who's up next?
You
This is
get
Jim as well.
You get another dose of me for a few minutes. So the next section is cultural resources. For this section, we talk a lot about, this one actually diverges a lot from our Century 5 cultural resources section. I think this is one of the one of my highlights of the plan that we've worked on with a lot of the work that Chloe has done with the settlement communities. So here, opening up, just talking about the different resources that will be referenced in this section. We begin talking about the arts and some of the newer arts investments that have been made over the last 10 years, including that Cannon Street Arts Center, the Pure Theater that you see the photo on the right. along with this is the future College of Charleston Arts Center that is in design stages right now. And then the Gilliard, of course, at the bottom. Next page, please. We talk about some of the events that go on in the city, including Spoleto Festival, the Farmers Market, some of the cultural events going on, highlights the history, and a big addition was the talking about Indigenous people and kind of including that as part of our history, something that we did not do in the Century 5 plan that I think strengthens this section a lot. Here, the next section, we talk about African-American culture and history. So we wanted to really highlight kind of the changing nature of our cultural resources in Charleston and kind of acknowledging the legacy of slavery and you know, the you know, reconciliation that has occurred over the last year or so and beyond. So we talk a little bit about how that kind of cultural resources environment is changing. Go to the next slide, please. And so part of that is highlighting the International African American Museum and some of the other institutions that are carrying on cultural resources programming that kind of acknowledges and is honest and transparent about Charleston's history. There's a photo of the Avery Center there at the College of Charleston. And then we go right into Chloe's excellent research that she has done with dozens of community members regarding historic African-American settlement communities and documenting the locations of those places and you know, talking about the importance of preserving and kind of giving some special consideration to those areas. There is a section on her methodology and the way that she worked with the community to identify those areas. Next slide, please. This will be the the settlement communities map for the entire city that Chloe's putting together. Next slide. This is, I believe, more of the more settlement communities information here, and then our recommendations. So we got some great input from some of the Preservation Society and some of the other groups, interest groups around town that helped inform some of these recommendations, as well as, of course, our public input engagement that went on throughout the plan. Some of the highlights here, I think, are obviously encouraging public and private investment in our arts community. We have the 4 and 5 are settlement communities focused recommendations and you know, creating kind of community plans for those areas, ways that we can bring those areas into the discussion when development occurs adjacent to those areas and other things like that. Let's see, we've got you know, some other recommendations that deal with African-American cultural tourism and cultural resources, including historic African-American houses of worship and other cemeteries, burial grounds, other very important sites to the African-American community and to the history of Charleston as a whole. So again, I didn't hit everything, so please, I'm happy to back up if needed and take any questions.
Thank you, sir. Questions from commission members, comments? No. Okay. No, Ms. Jacobs, you go ahead.
No, this one I have a lot of thought about because I've been actively engaged with Chloe on this, and this is very exciting that we have taken the huge effort to explore into this area and create the data for dynamics for equity. I think they've done an excellent job. They're really opening up a lot of doors, looking at a lot of information and expanding some thought on some things that in a formal way for the city that's going to lay some great groundwork, made some really thoughtful recommendations. And I'm very excited to see this aspect to the plan. Besides the African American settlement community, because I've really enjoyed my work and I thank y'all for including me in that. I like the fact internally that you've nodded to another plan, like for the preservation work, that you've nodded to a preservation plan that's already current and can be addressed. Instead of trying to reinvent the wheel, there's some other good things in there. So that was excellent. But I would like to thoughtfully discuss for a minute why in the definition of cultural resources, we talk about agricultural sites. And I know that with the historic settlement communities, looking at churches and cemeteries and stuff as part of that, but we have worked rudimentarily with an archaeological ordinance within the city that's kind of come and gone, but there's no mention of that at all within this plan. And I kind of think that might be a slight omission, that we might need to think about that, not necessarily as a recommendation, but at least some discussion that has been looked at and reviewed. And it may even be a recommendation that we should continue reviewing the necessity for an archaeological ordinance within the city. I know I served briefly on a panel that talked about that, where there are archaeological ordinances, like in the Williamsburg area and in St. Augustine, and they're different depending. So I really think we do need to add that back into this section. And one small little tiny edit, I think we need to make a nod to the Pearl, West Ashley, as an event venue when you make your list. Susan Pearlstein invested a lot of money into bringing that little venue into West Ashley, and we should acknowledge that work for that part of the city. So those are my comments. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Good thoughts and comments. Yes, sir. Jim, you got?
Yeah, if I could just make a comment. My apologies, Donna, for not giving you the due credit as well with the settlement communities. I think I focused mostly on Chloe's work, but I know that you were there doing a lot of that work with her, so I don't want that to go unacknowledged.
No, you're no problem, Jim. I've been very excited to be included in that work, and I've met a lot of great people, and we're opening up some opportunities that will move past the city into some great work after this plan is finished.
Thank you. Other questions, comments from commission members? If not, thank you, Jim. A lot of work, a lot of stuff. We appreciate it. Economic development, Chloe, who's going to present?
Christopher will present the next two sections.
All right, we give Ms. Morgan back. Thank you.
Here we are. Okay. And Eric Pullman helped put this together. So he doesn't get to have his glory today, but we will give him all comments that come out of today and adjustments. But economic development, of course, is, a huge part of how our city grows, redevelops, functions. It's important that we understand where the concentrations of employers are, what types of employers we're having, and this section does a good bit to do that. I am going to go through this, pretty quickly. We do have some key terms that are part of this that I think are very good for bringing back your college economics classes. And things that are good for keeping up with all this kind of data. It's important to see how things have evolved over the last 5 to 10 years. I like this chart for the Charleston regional job creation by sector. If anybody had any doubts that Charleston was a food town and a culinary destination and had really become one over the last decade, this shows you that as of 2018, and obviously in 2020 we had a downturn in this because of the pandemic, but look at the job creation in that area, even over construction work and things like retail sales and all that. So clearly a booming area. And then, of course, our wage level is increasing. We would love to see this increase faster and be more broadly increased, but we are seeing increased wages in this region. We have our wage stats here. That is, kind of perfunctory thing that you have in all kinds of economic development data. Then we have our cost of living comparison, which I think is very, very important too, that for all these 9 different cities, including comparably sized cities and some that are a little bit bigger like Atlanta and Washington and Charlotte, we still, when you compare them on things like cost of grocery, housing, utilities, we are second only to the Washington, D.C. area. So that shows what I think a lot of you all have noticed, that we are a more expensive region to live in. This is a regional level figure. So that includes our entire Charleston metro region. But we are even more expensive than Atlanta or Jacksonville, you know, things like places like that. Our recommendations are to keep Charleston's role as a regional job center, supporting employment, small business development, and sustainable tourism. And then we focus on each area of the city and each area's unique character and places of interest to invest in cultural and natural resources. We want to work with our staff and resources for targeted goals for each area of the city. So again, taking a little bit of a different approach, that we're trying to customize our economic development in the city and not just have it citywide, but look at what the needs downtown might be versus West Ashley versus Johns Island. I'm going to kind of skip through these other ones, but I'm happy to go into more detail. I do think it's important to point out how one of the recommendations, number 10, is the coordination that we need to continue doing with neighborhood jurisdictions on things such as Plan West Ashley, which we worked on very closely with Charleston County, as well as the St. Andrews PSD, Ethics Center, the Rethink Folly Road, where we have a Rethink Folly committee made up of Town of James Island, Charleston County, Folly Beach, and the city. And then our Johns Island community plan and organizations on Johns Island that are working to implement improvements out there. Anyway, I think I will wrap it with that, as we're starting to run a little bit long, and happy to answer questions on this economic development section.
You know, Chris, I think that number 8 is, to me, is a key one and a good one. That relaxed development requirement for neighborhood scale retail and restaurants and things. So I'm sure there's some thoughts to put into that to try to figure some things out. Absolutely,
and that's one that, with a new zoning ordinance, you know, overall we're going to be recommending for a, you know, elevation-based zoning ordinance, but it's important to understand that we really need to overhaul our entire zoning ordinance, and that could be done as we work on that as well.
Thank you, sir. Questions, comments, commission members? We got a couple of people. I know Harry's always been in the executive officer while economic development was a big thing, and Mr. Bailey, they understand all that stuff. Any questions? Harry, you go ahead. Or nothing? Okay. Donna?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Eric for his hard work here. I've seen a lot of his real-time use of data. This is a data-driven thing, and where we can use apps and some really interesting technology to research quickly economic development and see where the money is being spent and how people are moving. And so I'm excited that he worked on this. I'm very excited in recommendation number 5 that they made a nod toward affordable commercial properties. This kind of became apparent in the discussion with Plan West Ashley, that there are small businesses that are out there and they want to open up a brick and mortar, but they can't find affordable commercial space. So I'm glad that we've included that thought process in our recommendation. Your comment toward number 8, I know that they've relaxed those thresholds downtown for certain things. My only comment to that is we live in a neighborhood where they tend to park in the neighborhood. So when we reduce those thresholds, we need to figure out a way to balance that parking impact with neighborhoods. So there's a balance there we will definitely need to be working on as we move forward with that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I know, Ms. Jacobs, I know you patrol the neighborhood at night and keep the parking in check. No, we appreciate that. Any other questions, comments, commission members? If not, here's a fun one we're going to, transportation.
Okay. And obviously this is a really key element to how we grow and evolve our city. Of course, we did a citywide transportation plan a couple of years ago, and this plan will adopt that citywide transportation plan. So it doesn't do as deep a dive as one might think, because we've already had this great document put together. but we do have a few things that we're updating that have evolved over the last few years, and some good stats that folks might be interested in, such as, you know, no surprise, but that 86% of our city commutes to work by car. But surprisingly, we do have 7.6% coming in by bike. I know we've got some folks from Charleston Moves on today. Hopefully that is a figure that you all have seen, and 4.2 on foot. So, you know, we're making some strides here, but obviously need to do a whole lot, particularly when you look at the transit aspect. And we really want to get that one boosted. And the low country rapid transit that is going to be coming in, and we'll be talking about that in just a minute, hopefully will help a good bit on that. We have our equity statement from the citywide transportation plan, and just the whole background to what was in that. Then some background to other plans that have addressed transportation in the last few years, such as Plan West Ashley, the People Pedal plan about getting around the peninsula safely with walking and bicycling, and then People to Parks done by the PRC, getting all the folks between the different parks on foot and by bike is very important. Rethink Folly, which has a strong component of bike ped as well as mass transit. And then we have an overall review of recent and ongoing projects that are in the city. This is a map that shows the things that are either long-term planned or underway or soon to be underway, such as studies of Savannah Highway and studies of the Ashley River bridges to see how best for this area to function as it feeds into the crosstown, improvements to intersections along Savannah Highway that Charleston County is looking at, widening of the Glen McConnell Parkway, improvements at Main Road and 17 that Charleston County is undertaking, the long-range plan for the extension of the Mark Clark or 526 Expressway, the Northern Pitchfork that hopefully will be getting underway later this year, and then the improvements that are underway along Clements Ferry Road. Those are some of the key aspects. And then perhaps most excitingly, the Low Country Rapid Transit coming in from the Rivers Avenue area into Upper King Street, switching over to Meeting Street, down to Calhoun, through to the Medical District, and then back through West Edge and back out again. Will be a state-of-the-art transit system, unlike anything we've ever had in this region, and hopefully we'll get our transit numbers up a good bit. Our longer-term future also includes aspects such as the Low Country Low Line. This is a concept master plan. Of course, the right-of-way has been secured. There's an overall concept plan for envision for the low line, but we have a lot more detail to work on, money to be allocated together, and initial phases begun on this. So it's a very exciting aspect. One of the things that I think is also very, very important is our emphasis on waterway transit, because as our roads get more clogged and more expensive to widen, the water and traversing across it on a relatively free method other than for the watercraft and the docking systems is going to increasingly become a potential for our region, particularly from areas like the Cainhoy, Daniel Island area, and also from West Ashley. And we have we are going to have a map in here that has that on it. I don't have that at present. And then, of course, we have the Low Country Rapid Transit map for the entire route there, and then a little bit more of a deeper dive into that for the downtown area around the particular stops that there will be, where in a lot of instances, we hope to emphasize transit-oriented development, particularly in those areas where they are not is surrounded by historic structures and are in areas of higher elevation, such as the Upper Peninsula. We're going to really be emphasizing that kind of TOD orientation with this system. West Edge is also a good example of how the TOD type design can help bring riders to such a system. And then we have our overall, here it is, I'm sorry, I was jumping ahead with the Commuter Ferry, and here are some potential sites for Commuter Ferry, and we hope to have further planning occur on these as part of the recommendation for those. We have also brought into the discussion the impact of water with our transportation. That's something that 10 years ago we wouldn't have really thought about not the water that you float on to take a ferry boat, but the water that could make your car or feet or bicycle not able to work as normal, and how it's impacted your mobility. So we also have our transportation costs throughout the area. No surprise that Cainhoy Peninsula has the greatest transportation costs because it's furthest out from a lot of the key centers in the region. Anyway, it's interesting that West Ashley actually has a cheaper transportation costs than the peninsula. So in the recommendations, we of course overall want to continue to implement the recommendations from the citywide transportation plan. We want to continue to promote complete streets, new and redesigned roadways. We want to get a system for construction and maintenance of sidewalks because, you know, at present the city doesn't really have a funding stream for new sidewalks, and they are greatly needed in the city. Additional rapid transit routes, assuming we can make the success that we think it will be at the Low Country Rapid Transit, looking at other corridors such as Sam Rittenberg, Savannah Highway, Glen McConnell, Folly Road, and Clements Ferry, for how those could potentially be future rapid transit routes as well. And I'm going to kind of just jump ahead here, and for the sake of time, not list all of these, but I'm happy to go into more detail if you all have questions about a particular one.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. I tell you what challenges: transportation, the population grows, people driving, trying to get people to move from place to place, and I know it's one of the big things we hear about all the time. Commission members, questions or comments? Ms. Jacobs, you go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since we just did a transportation plan, I'm glad y'all are bouncing off of that one, because once again, there's no reason to, reinvent the wheel. In light of the discussion we had at the last Planning Commission meeting about multimodal paths with subdivision design, site design standards, and that's right on page 12. What the comp plan is supposed to do is set some fundamentals for that. This might be a really good place to add a subtle recommendation into this transportation plan. I'm looking at recommendation number 4, because there's absolutely no mention of school connectivity within any of this. And I think we need to add the connectivity to schools. So when you talk about connect more shopping and job centers, maybe it's connect more shopping, job centers and campus, because that's a campus land use thing, to neighborhoods with pedestrian paths and multi-use paths, and that maybe it should be included in, subdivision review in some form. So this might be an excellent place to add that recommendation and make sure that the use of school and connectivity to schools are addressed, because in my experience currently, the West Ashley Greenway prior to COVID looked like a highway of kids biking and walking to school, because we have 4 schools that easily address this pedestrian path. And really the streets that they cross are usually smaller neighborhood streets. So I think we need to add that into this discussion in this plan and into the recommendation in some form. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Jacobs. Makes sense. Harry, did you have your hand up? I'm sorry. No, sorry. Any other questions, Ms. Jacobs? Good comments and a lot of challenges. And we did talk about that the other day, about that pedestrian bikeway issues and stuff on subdivision approvals and review. Any other questions or comments, commission members? If not, we'll go into community facilities and priority investments.
Chloe is going to talk about this a little bit.
Okay. So this section is really, we're piecing together the, bringing awareness, doing some education about the capital improvement plan, which is a process that happens separately outside of the comprehensive planning. So the first section is introducing what that is and highlighting some of the projects, the different groups that are part of that planning process. So cultural and recreation, next, sure. Public service, urban and community development, and then additional services that were required to address in the comprehensive plan per state law, but that are carried out by other agencies. Those are listed here sort of separately. It's water and sewer, emergency medical services, educational facilities, and libraries. So we just touch on what the agencies that provide those and manage those that we coordinate with. Again, and all the images are capital improvement projects completed in the last 10 years. Daniel Island Recreation, Municipal Golf Course, and the last, go back one, Christopher, forgot to highlight these. The Waring Senior Center and the new roof on the MLK pool, the east side. And okay, go back now, Christopher, please, or advance. Next. This will have, first, go back one. I need my words. Okay. This one will show all of the completed capital projects in the last cycle, so 2015 to 2019. And there will be another one showing the capital improvement plan for the next 5 years. Okay, next, Christopher. And here's another capital improvement project, which is the restroom at Ferguson Village Park. And then we've combined priority investment, which is another required element of comprehensive plans. And again, this is addressed through the capital improvement plan, which happens separately outside of the comprehensive plan. What we've done is just highlighted some of the ways that priority investment could be, what considerations could be incorporated going forward in future capital improvement planning conversations that just reflect some of the things that we heard from the community during engagement, and also that reflect some of the priorities that are being raised in other elements of the plan. So, and those are advancing racial and economic equity, the suggestion or the point being made here is the city should prioritize funding for projects that, in no certain order, advance racial and economic equity, increase resiliency against flooding, sea level rise, and climate change, increase the amount of permanent, affordable, and attainable housing for all income levels, prevent displacement of vulnerable communities, improve mobility for all modes of travel, especially pedestrians, cyclists, and transit riders, increase and enhance parks and recreation facilities, especially in underserved areas, and preserve and restore what makes Charleston unique, its natural and cultural resources. We just touch on generally the category of funding sources. In the appendix, there will be a complete list of capital improvement projects funding sources, which is quite comprehensive. And that's also published every year in the city's budget document. And then the recommendations are short. Some of them are carryovers from the Century 5 plan. Just continuing to support only annexation of areas within the urban growth boundary, public facility standards, establishing those throughout, consistent service standards throughout the city, prioritizing stormwater and flooding solutions for special protection areas. So these are just kind of emphasizing things that are already happening, but just encourage, continued emphasis on these priorities. Assign priority to areas in greatest need of improved infrastructure and amenities, and making sure that that's in tangent with anti-displacement protections, that those are conversations being had at the same time, so that investment doesn't catalyze displacement. Continuing to improve collaboration with other jurisdictions to address all of these infrastructure challenges and investments that we need, and coordinating with local school districts. And this is growing the city's capacity to improve maintenance of existing drainage infrastructure. So even though that's something that Stormwater Management Department largely oversees, this was something that just was made very loud and clear by the public during engagement. We just wanted to make sure that we reflected the requests of the community that this be emphasized in the plan. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Chloe. I appreciate that. Questions, comments, commission members? Ms. Jacobs, you go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Every week we get this Hey Neighbor newsletter, and there's this long list of capital projects in there that are being done in the city. And it made me start thinking that maybe it's time, with the fact that we've grown so exponentially and we have so many capital projects that are necessary in the city, that an efficiency look at separating that into an independent department, sort of like stormwater was separated into an independent department because of the increased need for just to have a focused look at that. With the growth of the city and with the growth of the projects and with the growth of the maintenance of these projects, I didn't know if this was the appropriate element to consider recommending that we have an efficiency look at what that would take to separate and add that as a unit for the city because of our growth. So I just wanted to put that into the discussion. I know that's a bigger discussion and we don't have time for it. Maybe the commission members that are here can think about that, but I felt strongly that it might be time that we, that the city take on as a recommendation to evaluate the need for a capital projects department and capital projects and maintenance department, just based on growth of the city alone. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jacobs. Other questions, comments, commission members? If not, we'll go on to housing.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to try my best to be brief. So you have seen a lot of these graphics that we're going to show in this section, including the two here on the right that show the number of new units approved annually as a percentage of existing housing stock. So that's just showing that we are building a lot of units and on par with some fast growing mid-sized cities. There at the bottom, it's the amount of cost burden households in each area of the city that I think you all are very aware of. And then some key terms there. Next slide, please. There we go. Okay, so here we define affordability up there on the top left graphic. Talk about kind of how many housing units are in the city, how many are affordable units, and we talk about the need to preserve naturally existing affordable housing, which is that graphic with the number of households that shows the 5,233 figure, which is the amount of housing units that are affordable through deed restriction, only 6% in the city. On the right, you see the units needed by area based on our research from community data platforms that I think everyone is aware of. And then next slide, please. Here we talk a little bit more about the affordability gap, the need, kind of defining the need in the city for affordable housing units at different income levels. And then we talk about some of the other factors that contribute to housing choice. So affordability is really only one part of that equation, along with household size, location of households, or location of housing units, I should say, and other factors. Then on the far right, we kind of go over some of the different institutions or groups of governmental entities that are responsible for creating, preserving affordable housing around the city. Next slide, please. That chart H7, very descriptive there, is going to show the amount of affordable housing units created, deed restricted affordable housing units created since the year 2000. So we've shown that on some other slides, but that's what that image is going to show, basically a bar graph of the amount of units generated each year. Then we talk about the need to diversify our housing stock in different housing type, and talk about some of the market trends and reasons that we might need to do that. and the ways that we can benefit by diversifying the housing stock around the city. Then on the right gives some examples of what is called missing middle housing. And the following section is going to talk more about missing middle housing, but these are just some different examples around the city. And then also in the city of Atlanta, there, that larger image of the duplex is an example of what could be possible through maybe expanding some of those missing middle housing types around our city. So next slide, please. Oh, I thought we had a subheading that said missing middle. So that was the missing middle section. If you'll just back up 1 second, please. Sorry. Oh, that was a change I made. Well, he was talking to me. Anyway, so yeah, so this is we talk about what missing middle is, the concept, and how it's being used to address some different issues associated with affordable housing, and also right-sizing housing and kind of opening up stock that can allow people to stay in their current location while still having a type of housing that works for their lifestyle. So if you'll go to the next slide, please. We kind of wrap this section up by talking about some of the different effects of our housing affordability problem, and so how these kind of manifest in the community, including increased traffic when people have to live further away from the job centers, businesses struggling to staff. We've seen that a lot with restaurants downtown, that their employees can't afford to live downtown because the stock is not available. And then of course, homelessness and displacement are big effects of affordable housing, the lack of affordable housing. Here, I think we've covered a lot of these recommendations in other sessions. So obviously, encouraging a diversity of housing types is a key theme. In expanding, the ability to include attached style housing, like townhomes, condominiums, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, by right in more base zoning districts around the city. Some other things are, creating dedicated funding stream for affordable housing development through some of our planning and zoning tools. Looking at mixed income housing units and also mixed use to go along with kind of what Krista was referring to, the transit oriented development uses around the future low country rapid transit route. So that's number 4 that I was just referring to. And yeah, and I think we've added a few that you've all may have not seen. I think number 15 is one, supporting the creation of senior housing, senior affordable housing in areas of the city. And then continuing to enforce our short-term rental ordinance. So yeah, I will take any questions. I try my best to be brief, but it's hard.
So you do a good job on such important information. Questions, comments, commission members? Ms. Jacobs, you go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's some very exciting stuff in this section also. This is where education that we talked about during community engagement becomes really important, because during my early tenure as a planning commissioner, staff has spent some time educating me on what's known as missing middle and the real understanding of density. And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding in our community about this. So with some of these recommendations and our education, I think we might be able to move forward and have the community understand what we're trying to do. So I'm really glad to see that you're adding these terminologies as a beginning of education for the community. And I appreciate staff's time to educate me on these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jacobs. And I tell you, Mr. Bailey, I'm coming, but I tell you, Ms. Jacobs, thanks you for educating, but we know Ms. Jacobs is educating all of us. So anyway, Mr. Bailey, you go ahead.
I was going to kind of save this as a wrap-up comment for the end, but Ms. Jacobs kind of inspired me to share this thought now with her comments, and that is that, this entire plan, it's it's an aspirational document that has all these recommendations on housing, transportation, cultural resources, capital projects, resilience. I'm sure I've missed a couple. And of course, there'll never be enough money to do all the things that are recommended here. And fortunately, that's not our job to figure out. That's the elected leaders of the city. But, you know, nowhere in this document does it say we ought to just stop development altogether. Yet, I think that's what many people in the public think is the answer to traffic or, you know, resilience issues or what have you. And I think maybe that's sort of where Ms. Jacobs was going when talking about education on density and things like that. But I wonder if we should perhaps opine on what we think would happen if we just completely put the brakes on development, because it seems to me in my day-to-day travels around the city, that's what a lot of people think we ought to do. And I personally don't believe it. I believe it would make affordable housing situation worse. I think that it would make a lot of our issues worse. But I wonder if there is any value in exploring that as a strategy, so we can quit talking about it if we conclude it's the wrong strategy. So anyhow, those are my comments.
Nope, good comments, Mr. Bailey, and I agree with you. It's you hear that every day of just stop growth or stop this, and it's just not that easy. Imagine what economic development would do if you stop growth. People would stop moving their companies here and everything else. So other comments, questions, or staff, any comments?
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to follow up both of my fellow commissioners' comments, which I think were spot on, particularly Mr. Bailey. You know, and I really, Jim Hemphill did a nice job summarizing what I think. I mean, every section of this plan is important, and that's why it's a 10-year plan, and every section is important. But I dare say this might be the most important section, and I think that I think Mr. Bailey is right that this is, you know, for a planning commissioner, this is the most challenging issue we deal with. You know, there are other city bodies that tackle other challenges that are in this plan. But for a planning commissioner, you know, the zoning and planning challenges, subdivision and so forth that we deal with from meeting to meeting, I do think that some sort of basic, you know, even if it's one page that we could refer citizens to, just as Mr. Bailey said, that that shutting off the pipeline of development is actually the worst thing we could do to make this a more livable place for the people who live here and the people who are going to move here. So anyway, I just want to commend my fellow commissioners for their comments, and perhaps it's, you know, that what's here is enough, and this is a separate issue. But I do think that that creating some communications tools that the commission could refer people to and that staff could refer people to, and so forth, I think that would be really, really helpful. So.
Thank you, Mr. Hussain. And you know, I guess the question is, how do we educate the public? Because we see it all the time when we have subdivision requests and we say we can't have that many more people and we got to stop. So we hear it all the time. You're right. And I think Mr. Bailey and Ms. Jacobs are right. How do we educate the public? Ms. Jacobs, you go ahead.
And I've thought about that question. I even suggested to staff that maybe quarterly meetings before Planning Commission, we do a half an hour of planning 101, these basic things, because I was sent a video by a staff member called Guess the Density. It's a short little YouTube video. You're going to get it wrong every time. You're going to look at something and say, oh, that's a nice suburban layout. And you'll find out that the density is completely different than what you think. So some of these things are counterintuitive. They hear the word density and they think the wrong thing. And so I think we have opportunities with YouTube videos and to link to those educational processes that will help us. As Mr. Lassane says, we can't, and Mr. Bailey says, we can't stop development. We've got to manage it smartly. And part of that management smartly is teaching the community how we make the decisions and why we make the decisions. And if we did that quarterly at half an hour before Planning Commission, maybe we even get our CEUs that way. So we could kill a lot of birds with one stone. And so that's my absolutely drilling down micro comment on that one. Thank you for the time.
So I think I'd like to challenge staff, obviously not today, but to consider and listen. You heard what we have to say on that, and how do we educate the public about these issues? If y'all can think about that way, I'd greatly appreciate it, and commission members as well. Thank you, Chloe. Any other questions, comments on housing? If not, we'll go to land use. You, Philip?
We are gonna zip through this really fast and have Philip, are you?
Yes.
Yeah, there we go.
I am here and ready.
All right.
So, okay, so yeah, so this of course is one of the two elements of the plan that we did focus a lot on, obviously, along with housing. And of course, you've seen a lot of the data, seen a lot of the presentations, at least a couple of times because of our heavy focus on this and housing, on land use and housing. So I'm not going to go into a tremendous amount of detail, but of course, I'll be happy to, and Christopher along with me, answer any questions about any question or about anything that you need more in-depth detail on. Obviously you've seen this kind of in presentation form, and now you've seen it in document form, kind of a narrative of presentations you've seen. So of course we would be interested in hearing comments about how we how this was presented in document, and making sure that it is understandable and relatable, of course concepts and content are also key in this, and of course if as mentioned briefly before, education is something that's going to be key, not only to the other elements, but the land use, and maybe especially some of the land use recommendations, surrounding water, and the recommendations we made based on our analysis with water. So anyway, I think you can probably go ahead to the next slide, Christopher, and we have shown this before, obviously the elevation risk zone maps. This is just a citywide map. And of course, you've seen some more in-depth area focused maps, such as, West Ashley, James Island Peninsula. And of course, you've got the 4 risk zones of high ground adapt zone, compound flood risk zone, and the tidal flood risk zone. And I don't know that I need to go into any more discussion or detail about that, but we'll be happy to answer questions. Next slide. And of course, you've seen these graphics as well. Just kind of explanatory graphics that try to get us from, our very in-depth, heavy data analysis that our consultants did, and kind of condensing that down into something understandable for us, the public, and our elected officials, in finally boiling it down to our recommendations. So as you can see, obviously the planning strategies you've seen before, adapt, preserve, grow, and defend, stemmed from our analysis, especially a focus on elevation and where water is going or will be in the future. And so that, of course, elevation helped inform our new future land use maps that, we'll, of course, you've seen before, but we'll look at again here. We developed 12 future land use categories, and we started off with elevation and in creating some of these, especially the low impact and conserved areas, which would roughly translate to kind of well, obviously the lowest area of the city in which we may need to start pulling back development and making certain policy recommendations through other zoning or stormwater codes. I did just want to point out that as we move to the next slide, that now this is just a quick list of all of the land use categories. And I'll go into a little more detail, but I did want to point out that as we ran some of the numbers in our land use maps, it's notable that the city is made up of areas that are developed and those areas that are undeveloped or undevelopable. And it turns out that a lot of the city, and of course, this is within the UGB and within the boundaries and not, river area. We're talking, areas within our sort of planned boundaries. 50% of the city is actually natural or wetland currently, plus, other sort of conserved areas such as parks and or even areas that were conserved, private lands that were conserved. I'll just go ahead on to the next slide. The pages that we're seeing now are more in-depth analysis of each area of the city. And then you can obviously read those on your own and make comments. But then let's see, the next slide, please. Next, this is one that could generate some discussions because it does kind of break down by land use category and by area of the city, how much, of the city is made up of each category. As you can see with citywide, within the UGB, and this of course is including both city and county area, but excluding town of James Island area, since we were not we're not involved in planning that area. You can see, for instance, citywide, you've got a very high percentage of wetland and natural area. And 15%, you've got low impact conserved area, which is roughly the area that is sort of a marsh migration, where we would see potential for marsh migration in the future over the next few decades. Some of the land use categories that you might assume would be more intense, more dense, residential development, might be your city centers and your neighborhood edge. As you can see, these categories make up a pretty low percentage of the city overall, and also in most of the other or most of the areas of the city as you break them down, except for the peninsula. Obviously, city centers makes up a pretty good chunk of the peninsula, and some of the other categories like neighborhood and and of course, there's a good amount of campus and industrial on the peninsula as well. But if you, as you look at this, if you have any questions about these areas or comments, please feel free to chime in before we move on. Of course, you've seen these maps. These are, of course, the future land use maps. These are not in their final style for the plan. We'll eventually get these into the plan, but the only thing we've changed, I believe, since you saw the land use maps last, is we've changed a bit of the peninsula. In this, it seems like a pretty obvious change, but the State Ports Authority area, the Union Pier area, it was changed from city centers to industrial, which is the current use right now, and may be for a little while longer. It's kind of hard to say when that might change and what would happen at Union Pier over the next 10 years. So yeah, again, you've seen most of these maps. We probably don't need to dwell on any one of them unless you want to as we go through them. But we can move straight on to recommendations, which I think is right after these maps.
While you're scrolling through these, Philip, just make a quick, give a quick update on the settlement community layer on here. This is I muted you, Philip, just so you know, so that there's not an echo. This is updated from the last time you saw these maps, and we really want to emphasize that these outlines are should be interpreted as approximate boundaries, and not even, I don't even think boundaries is the right word. These are just highlighting sort of the general area, and we're going to work with our graphic designer to see how we can best sort of de-emphasize that line. We don't want it to be read as a hard line, sort of signifying in or out settlement area. And just to give you a sense of how these were drawn, we have the approximate boundary, and then I traced loosely around that, by hand, traced loosely around that to include more natural areas, and then added a 100-foot buffer to that rough outline just to round out the edges. So really, these are approximate, and it's meant to highlight an area, a general area. It's not meant to signify you're either in settlement or you're out settlement. This will cross property lines. And so just for those who have not been following along and looking at this for the first time, and for commissioners, that's something I think is really important in terms of how these maps are read.
Thank you, Chloe. Philip, you gonna run through any recommendations you want to highlight?
Yeah, so I think these are more or less what you'd seen before. I think we honed some of the language of them and added maybe a couple. I think one to note that we added was let's see, to continue to work collaboratively with basically jurisdictions such as BCD COG and North Charleston, and much with respect to the low country rapid transit corridor, where we would obviously, especially for the peninsula, look to have a little bit more density around that corridor. hubs of residential density. And that's also reflected in the plan map or the future, land use plan map. So we wanted to have a recommendation that also reflected that. Christopher, were there others in this list that you wanted to pull out specifically?
I think it's important to remember that this plan, seeks to strengthen the urban growth boundary. We hear a lot about the desire to do that, particularly in reference to Johns Island, and we feel it's in a good, strong position on Johns Island. Remarkably, it's in pretty much the same location it was drawn over 20 years ago. So that's a really good sign that it has been respected over the last 20 years. We think it would be very good to have continued coordination with the adjacent jurisdictions, i.e. mainly Charleston County, to protect land outside the UGB via land acquisition or park development and conservation easements. And that's, a way that you can really work to strengthen it. Of course, we have a small strengthening that we think we could do along Lower Folly Road, where we've got some zoning that's on the ground already that is not really compatible with a rural area along Lower Folly. So we can certainly make a change there, but that's up to commission and city council. But UGB is a key part of this. But I think in general, what we see is a city that is a very green city, because we have taken into account, where the lower areas are, and also, trying to keep other areas preserved. Elevation is key to everything in all this. It is going to require a new zoning ordinance that will be very much elevation based. It seems to be a city that will still have areas for growth, but will maintain an overwhelming sense of green within it, with over 50% of the land in that in those kind of green categories. By my computations, almost 3/4 of James Island would be in that kind of those green categories of the marsh and the lower elevation aspects and parks. So it's a really strong thing for our city.
Okay. Any questions, comments, or commission members about land use? There's a lot of stuff there, a lot of important stuff. Ms. Jacobs, you go ahead.
Quickly, the percentage chart that you showed, Philip, was not in the printed version. Is that in the digital version, just for reference? That future land use percentage chart, because that was really important. And
it's a late addition. It's something that we can put into the digital version.
Perfect. If you just add it to the Dropbox, that would be great, because I'd like to review that a little carefully.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely.
And I want to echo everything that Christopher Morgan said about the UGB. He and I had a dynamic discussion one time during one of the meetings about how everybody wants to codify the UGB, but he did a beautiful job, and I keep stimulating his thought process, and he'll remember what he said to me that day, that we can add how a lot of it's already naturally protected in some ways, and I say naturally or normally or by some jurisdictional issue is protected. And I think to once again, back to the education component, that if people understand that a little better and they understand it within this plan in some verbiage is critical, because we keep referencing it. And I'm just going to continue to say that to him, and hopefully he'll have a remembrance of what he said to me that day, because I think that if we could have recorded it, we could have put it right in the plan.
I didn't capture it today, Donna.
Well, we are recorded, so hopefully it'll continue to stimulate that, because you're right, people talk about the UGB all the time, and after you said that to me that day, I had a much better understanding of that and how it is in a lot of ways already protected. So thank you for letting me once again mention that.
Thank you, Ms. Jacobs. Other commission members, questions, comments?
I have a comment, Charlie.
Yeah, Ms. Lampasas, you go ahead.
When we're looking at the elevation-based land use, and it kind of goes back to the housing, and I apologize, I've been in and out I've been listening to the entire meeting, as an attendee, you know, listening to it, but I've been off and on this, but I've heard everything. Are we going to look at height requirements for housing? Goes back to housing when we do an elevation-based land use.
That would all be part of it, yes, ma'am.
So we'd have to increase the height in order to add in the elevation-based, correct?
I mean, it would be on the table. I mean, where we don't have existing development in areas like these low impact and conserved areas, if there isn't existing development, I think we would be recommending very, very low density, you know, less than 1 unit per acre, because it's the most threatened area. So even height doesn't really, you know, fix that, because the water is coming. In areas that are already developed that are low impact and conserved, you know, that's going to be a defend and adapt. You know, houses may need to be elevated, or houses may need to have other defense mechanisms so that they can continue to, you know, function the way they have in the past, because of, you know, the rising waters over the next 30 years.
Well, it goes, Christopher, it goes without saying that if you elevate a house and you have the garage level on the lower part, that, you know, if you're trying to get to that 2.5 stories, it just appears that the higher it's elevated, that more height. And really, I'm talking about across the board. If you do choose, I mean, what if somebody chooses to elevate their home for fear that they're not even in a flood zone, for instance? Is that going to be something that we'll consider to increase the height requirement for somebody that's anticipating a possible flooding?
Yeah, I think that's something we'd look at, you know, just across the board with all of this.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lampsis. Anybody else? Questions, comments? Not. Thank you, Mr. Overcash and Mr. Morgan, for that. And we'll go into, I guess, resilience and equity, right? Yep.
Yes.
Who's gonna present on that?
Yeah, so Jim and I are going to tag team this one. I'm just going to introduce it. So we've mentioned in the past, resilience being an optional element according to state law. That actually changed in 2020. It's now required, but we were ahead of the curve from the onset. We knew that it was essential for us to include an element on resiliency. And as we were putting it together, one of the reasons why it wasn't in the last packet in terms of draft segments of the city plan is we really wanted to make sure that resilience was threaded throughout the plan, and was going to use this element at the end to summarize how resiliency has been threaded throughout the plan, and also any sort of additional recommendations that didn't quite fit into other sections. As we were talking about this and also trying to articulate this racial and equity framework, we realized that this chapter needed to be expanded to not just focus on resiliency, but also to focus on equity, sort of two intersecting, inseparable pieces that need to be focused throughout the plan. So that is that's what we've attempted to do with this chapter. It goes into, it brings back the resilience and equity framework that's introduced in the beginning. And then it first looks at the more sort of classic resilience, and then it goes into equity. So I'm going to kick it to Jim now to take you through the rest of the chapter.
Great. So yeah, as Chloe said, we kind of begin the section with the traditional understanding of resilience, especially talking about climate change. Some of the other sections didn't really provide the proper venue to explore all that the city is doing to combat and mitigate climate change, especially in our Office of Resilience and Sustainability, the Mayor's Office of Resilience and Sustainability. It's a tongue twister there. So they have, you know, the sea level rise strategy, the vulnerability assessment, and the climate action plan, really important documents that we wanted to give their proper weight in the plan. So if you'll just turn the page, please. So we kind of thought about breaking these resilience into climate resilience and actions that we can take to mitigate climate change and the effects of climate change. Then flooding resilience, as you see here, and highlighting some of the policies and plans that work to combat flooding around the city. Over to the right, you see how sea level rise can impact these elevation zones over time that we keep talking about in the land and water analysis. You can see the Spring Fishburne drainage tunnel, massive project here in the bottom right corner is a photo of that. Turn the page, please. Then our next kind of type of resilience is ecological, and talking about how we can preserve and make our natural environment and the flora and fauna of our area more resilient in the future, and kind of save those habitats through different planning and zoning mechanisms. I think we mentioned conservation design as one of those ways to kind of preserve the pre-development state of a site. The next is social resilience. Oh no, if you'll go back, please. Thank you. Sorry. The next is social resilience, and so this is an area that we can introduce the health in all policies framework that MUSC and a lot of our internal city staff promote. So how can we promote health and wellness through planning and zoning mechanisms, things like active transportation. Also, as I mentioned in another section, the exposure to extreme heat as another area that we can create policies that help to mitigate those effects. Here on the right, this image may change. This is something that Chloe and I were really excited to dive into this week. This is an image from a 1931 study that the city commissioned as kind of a guide for the city's very first zoning ordinance. And so we are actually, these maps are old maps on linen. It was really, really cool to be able to look at those, take some photos. But really, we're going to be looking at the original report as well, just to highlight the way in which, planning and zoning policies have kind of exacerbated or even caused segregation and other inequitable outcomes over time. So this map, it's really hard to see, but it actually outlines future districts by race. So definitely kind of reckoning with kind of some of the origins of our discipline and highlighting that and being open, creating an open space for dialogue about that. If you'll turn the page. So here we're kind of getting into our equity section. You see this is the map from the 3x3 study that Wagner and Ball was doing to kind of respond to the Army Corps' 3x3 study. So we wanted to include this image of where a future seawall might be located around the peninsula. But then we get into equity and like I said, kind of exploring kind of the origins of planning as a discipline and how prior planning practices kind of exacerbated inequity over time, and some of the ways that we can be mindful of that in the future as we create new policies to try to mitigate kind of the unintended consequences of those policies. If you turn the page, please. And here, kind of speaking to that, is the Septima Clark Parkway, which we highlight as during the 1960s policy of urban renewal. Our highway system cut straight through historic African American neighborhoods, demolished a lot of houses and really split these neighborhoods. and splitting families and things like that. So these are kind of the lasting impacts of some of these inequities that have been perpetuated by planning in the past. And then here, just kind of talking about how we can work to address some of these racial and socioeconomic equity concerns in the future. One more page. And then we have, here are some of our equity and resilience recommendations. So these are more tailored to the 4 elements of resilience that I mentioned earlier. And then also building equity and equity considerations into future planning processes. We also have the climate targets that come from, or our greenhouse gas emission targets, I should say, that come from the Climate Action Plan, and some other recommendations from that plan here. And then to the left, you'll see, I'm not sure if it's included in this PDF. Can you take one more page? Yeah, okay, we did have it in here, but this is a way that we try to weave kind of recommendations from all throughout the plan, in the spirit of kind of connecting the dots and showing how resilience and equity show up throughout the plan. We relisted a lot of the recommendations, talked about what element they're from, some other plans and studies that have suggested these things or created the basis for these recommendations, and then what type of equity or resilience they kind of fall under. So I think we have like 40 or so recommendations here that we thought were good connections to make. I think that's all I got for this section.
Chloe, anything else on that? If not, again, a lot of stuff. Questions, comments from commission members?
I did want to highlight one quick thing that's at the end there. It talks about the partnership that we had with the Community Assistance Program with the College of Charleston. They worked with us on sort of developing equity framework that racial equity lens and equity lens that morphed into the resilience and equity framework that's in the plan. So they were also, many don't know this, but that same group of people are also working with the Special Commission on Equity, Inclusion, and Racial Conciliation. So the Community Assistance Program has also been working with them on their framework. So those were sort of naturally in coordination with each other. So we were not sort of creating our own bus, if you will, where they're creating a different one. Like we were in touch, and the same racial equity glossary that was provided to the commission has also been incorporated and cited in this plan and will be in the appendix. So there is that connection there that I thought was important to highlight.
Thank you, ma'am. Donna, you had, Ms. Jacobs, you had your hand up?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just quickly looked at your little reference list, and I didn't know with the addition of that map that you just found that y'all shared today, that we might make a nod to the book, The Color of Law. For those of y'all that have not read that book, it does describe exactly what the staff has been describing to you in this equity understanding. So I think it might be helpful, once again, for an education purpose, if there's not a direct reference to the book, just as additional reading, because it is an excellent book. And I'm trying to figure out how to do this part, but the fact that so many things that were done impacted the African-American community, but they're still here and woven so integrally into our community, if we might want to speak just to their resilience through so many things that have lasted to this, and that we're going to make it a little bit more formal with their inclusion, which is not the right word. But I just wanted to add to that. And then in the recommendation too, I don't immediately see it, and maybe it's somewhere, that I know the Stormwater Department has set up a routine assessment, evaluation, and maintenance of all the stormwater system in the whole city. But a lot of the older neighborhoods that are very impacted by changing communities and lower income communities often have the highest impact with regard to stormwater. And that if we just want to make sure that we have an equitable look at the city for that, for management of stormwater, as a recommendation in the, and I don't know if equity and resilience is the right place for it, but I just wanted to have that in the conversation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Jacobs. Other questions, comments, commission members? Okay, Chloe, who's gonna wrap up the end of this? Or Mr. Morgan, are we? I know there was some reports here. Is that something you want to discuss? Or?
Yeah, I'm going to stop the share on this so we can get everybody here on the same screen. And yeah, so that's, the document, and we've heard your comments today, been making notes and things like that. Love to have more discussion if you all want to. I know we're running a little bit over what we had expected. We did get some comments. Obviously, this is not the public hearing, but you all are always welcome to, let folks speak or hear the comments that did come into us today. Right now, we do have your public hearing scheduled for June 9th, which will be the full public hearing. And then, of course, there'll be another public hearing when this is at City Council in July. And there is also anticipated a workshop between you all and City Council sometime between June 9th and July 21st, or July 20th, excuse me. I think there is going to be a lot of other public dialogue that can happen, but if you all want to kind of take a look at the comments that we got, I know we had some advocacy organizations that sent some items in, and a property owner group also did.
Thanks, Mr. Morgan, and I appreciate you reviewing that timeline again. Chloe, are the comments, are they people that have called in or are going to Zoom in, or are they just written comments?
No, we have 4 people signed up to speak.
Okay, why don't we go ahead and do that, if that,
Okay, start with Betsy LaForce. Betsy, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, ma'am. You go ahead. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. My name is Betsy LaForce. I'm with the Coastal Conservation League at 131 Spring Street. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on the final rough draft of the city plan. We want to commend the city planning staff and consultants who've been working tirelessly on engaging the public, incorporating their feedback, and preparing this plan for initial review. There is a lot of great content, as we've seen in the meeting today. We look forward to remaining engaged throughout these final stages of public participation and plan adoption. We appreciate the city staff's receptivity to our comments and the work that's been done to incorporate many of the recommendations we've shared so far throughout this update process. We did want to go on record at this juncture with 2 quick points for your consideration in advance of the public hearing on June 9th. First, from the land use element regarding the Cainhoy area, we understand the development pressures facing the Charleston area, but encourage the city to find better solutions to guide the development of the Cainhoy Peninsula. It is possible to protect threatened ecological and cultural resources while also citing future residents out of harm's way of flooding. Development plans for Cainhoy should apply the living with water approach from the Dutch dialogues, as well as the Dutch dialogues recommendations, to avoid and minimize negative ecological impacts to the greatest extent possible. To this end, future land use designations for the area north of Clements Ferry Road should be adjusted from suburban and suburban edge designations to rural designations to protect the approximately 4,500 acres of freshwater wetlands and longleaf pine forests that are home to threatened and endangered species, as well as irreplaceable cultural resources, including those of the Jack Primus community. We feel strongly that future development on the Cainhoy Peninsula should be concentrated exclusively in the city center around Clements Ferry Road. And as such, we recommend the suburban edge future land use designations along the UGB around Johns Island and Cainhoy be adjusted to lower densities that match the rural character of those areas. Secondly, and lastly, from the transportation element regarding the personal vehicle section, in order to maintain consistency and integrity with resilience planning efforts, the Dutch dialogues, many other recommendations throughout the draft city plan, any recommendations related to advancing or supporting the I-526 Mark Clark Extension project should be removed from the city plan and replaced with a commitment to prioritizing projects that are designed and funded and do not threaten cultural and natural resources nor exacerbation of flooding. Thank you so much for your consideration of these comments.
Thank you for your comments and your time, Ms. LaForce. Chloe, who's signed up next?
Next, we have Brian Turner. Brian, whenever you're ready.
Mr. Turner, you go ahead whenever you're ready.
Hi, can you all hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brian Turner. I'm Director of Advocacy with the Preservation Society of Charleston. We want to express sincere compliments to the planning staff on turning around this draft plan. It's an incredible piece of work, frankly, and it's a huge improvement, we think, over the last draft initial recommendations. And Commissioner Bailey pointed out earlier that good planning doesn't stop growth. It really helps us manage change in a way that's mindful of what makes Charleston so unique. And so if there's one thing that this process has really made clear to us, it's how critical it is that our planning department has adequate funding in the city budget. We can't manage change well or achieve the good public policy expressed in this plan without a fully funded planning department. So we aim to push for that in the budgeting process, and we hope you'll join us in those efforts. The Preservation Society has been consistent partners with the city throughout the public engagement process and has conducted outreach to our members, conducted webinars with our partners to help community better understand how impactful this plan really will be on development of the city. And I'm not going to go into detail on our comments. You all should have a comment letter from us. But I just want to really commend the genuine good faith effort planning staff has made here to address our concerns, giving greater emphasis on the prevention of displacement of lower income residents, and much improved cultural resources element that really showcases how preservation can be a tool for both sustainability as well as economic development, and efforts to protect existing housing stock through robust enforcement of important policies such as the short-term rental ordinance. And lastly, I just want to make a note on African-American settlement communities. I think this initiative in the plan really showcases how better inventory and documentation of cultural resources in Charleston is a critical first step in working towards their protection. It showcases how preservation tools are a first step in promoting equity. And I join Commissioner Jacobs in her acknowledgement of the color of law as really a tome that we should all be paying attention to of some of the failures that we've exhibited in the past and the need to move beyond them and create a more equitable zoning code moving forward. So thank you all for your efforts and your support of this very good public policy envisioned in the plan. We look forward to future opportunities.
Thank you, Mr. Turner, for your comments and your time as well. Chloe, who's next?
Next is James Wilson. James, whenever you're ready.
Mr. Wilson, you go ahead.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission and city staff. Thanks for the opportunity to speak at this meeting, ahead of the actual public hearing. I'm here, I'm James Wilson with Womble Bond Dickinson. I'm here on behalf of the owners of the property that is under the existing Cainhoy PUD zoning master plans. And so we've hit on this a couple times in this meeting, the Cainhoy property. I wanted to give you a little bit more background on that and address an issue that I think still needs some attention in the draft comprehensive plan. So the Cainhoy properties consist of about 9,000 acres, about 9,000 acres within the city, annexed mostly back in the 90s. There are 3 coordinated PUD master plans for this property that were adopted by the city, and of course approved by Planning Commission and adopted by the city back in 2014. The PUD master plans call for a mixture of residential and commercial, just as you'd expect, and conservation areas. And those PUDs are also, incorporated into 2 development agreements for this property. So development agreements, of course, entered into by the city with the property owners, and it locks in the zoning until 2046. So that's 25 years from now. And as this commission knows, the purpose of development agreements is to provide certainty for future development, and particularly when you have very large projects like this with substantial investment and infrastructure. And this is a process with the permitting that, in development that's underway, and this has been ongoing for some time and continues to be ongoing. So the proposed new comprehensive plan here is, it's in some important ways, it's inconsistent with the existing PUD master plans. And that's what we want to just make sure this commission is aware of. We think this is a fundamental problem that really needs to be addressed before Planning Commission makes any decisions on this comprehensive plan. And let me say, we are very glad to sit down with city staff and with commission members, and of course, with city council, and to get it sorted out. But we do think this is really important to get straight. The goal of this comprehensive plan is, of course, it's to serve as a guide for the city going forward. And that's really important, as you all well know, and I've heard before you all periodically. That comprehensive plan is the guide that we need to be looking at when we're making zoning changes. But it needs to reflect, the actual state of things. We touched earlier on the Ports Authority and what that should look like, in the draft was changed to make that properly reflect what it is and what it will be for at least the foreseeable future. What we have here is that we have some existing zoning and development agreements that are going to be in place for the next 25 years. And for this plan to be useful, it needs to be consistent with those existing approvals that are going to be in place for a long time. The inconsistency that, if you went forward with this, the inconsistency is going to lead to confusion. It's going to lead to poor decision making. In worst case, it's actually going to lead to decisions that conflict with existing agreements and even lawsuits. And it's worth bearing in mind that our state statute, our enabling legislation, if you will, it actually calls for infrastructure development to be consistent with the comprehensive plan. And when you start creating a comprehensive plan that's inconsistent with the existing commitments of the city's undertaking, that creates conflicts. That's not a good path for us to go down. We really don't believe that the right approach is that this comprehensive plan, at least in this area, we believe needs some more work. It needs to be consistent with what's already approved. We're glad to sit down with the staff to work that out and figure it out. But we wanted to go ahead and bring that to the attention of Planning Commission now, rather than wait for the public hearing next month. So we'd be certainly glad to answer any questions, and we look forward to working on this with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. I appreciate, again, your time. We hear you, and we look forward to discussing this further, I'm sure. Chloe, I think there's another person that signed up to speak.
Yes. Our last speaker is Susan Smith, or Smythe. Susan, please correct me if I mispronounced your last name, and go ahead whenever you're ready.
Go ahead, Ms. Smythe. You go ahead. I hope you're doing well.
I'm doing well. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. I was primarily a substitute for James Wilson, just in case he ended up not being able to speak. And I don't have anything to add to what he has eloquently said, other than that this is a small town that's in the planning within the urban growth, within the smart growth precepts that are very similar to Daniel Island, in which a fair amount of density will be is planned for development in order to have jobs and shopping and homes all located within an area that is large enough for such planning, and will relieve some of the traffic and will be good planning for the future. It's also some of the highest land in the city. And the commitments that have been made by the city throughout the decades to this property are substantial. And a substantial investment has been made in promoting the development in accordance with those commitments from the city. We think it's very smart growth. We disagree that it should be low density. We think that this is the ideal place for development, and there is a substantial amount of pressure for residential development, as you know. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak, and we look forward to working with the staff to make corrections with respect to how this area has been treated. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Smythe, and you certainly know this area better than anybody, as you were the first one. You created this way back, so thank you for your time.
I've been involved for decades.
Yeah, no. Well, you don't look a day older, so that's good.
Oh,
but
you
anyway.
too nice. Thank you.
All right, commission members, I guess we're coming to a close. Comments, questions. Again, I'm gonna go back and again, this is a rough draft, so we still have some things to go through and to change, and it's not just a draft, it's a rough draft, and I want to thank staff again for all the time, the many hours and days and weeks that they spent on this. And it's interesting, every 10 years you do this, it's a big, I can't imagine what's happened in 10 years in Charleston and how important this is. So commission members, comments, questions? Ms. Jacobs, you go ahead.
I would like to wrap up by telling the staff that I did read the Century 5 plan a couple of times when I came on as a commissioner, and this plan is very readable, very approachable, and I compliment them on this. They did excellent work with that, and I just wanted to say that as an overarching comment. Something I didn't mention earlier, but I wanted to put out there, these key terms that you're mentioning, I did mention this earlier in a conversation with staff, but I want to put it on the record. I know that some of the definitions have been made internally, and some of the definitions have come from maybe a planning key term book somewhere, but I think there should be some nod to how we came to these key terms, how we came to these definitions, since we're going to adopt them and use them moving forward, that we might just want to understand how we got to them. I think I heard Jim mention that there was some consideration somewhere of the review of the landscape ordinance. Did I understand that correctly, or was it a tree thing, Jim, that you mentioned?
It was the tree protection ordinance.
Tree protection ordinance. Mm-hmm. Okay, because we might want to look at the whole landscape ordinance within this. And I appreciate the addition of the education. And with the resilience, I just wanted to make a comment, because I've already said this to staff. Resilience has many forms, and I think that we need to really acknowledge that we lived resilience by the development of this plan. We did it during a pandemic. We did it by being nimble. We did it by adapting very quickly to the circumstances that we were put in. And I would like to see even an additional nod to that be written in an introductory form or somewhere in the plan, so that we always marked ourselves by after Hugo forward. We're going to mark ourselves by pandemic moving forward. And I think we really do need to acknowledge the fact that we put together and worked on a very high level plan for the city of Charleston that's very progressive and thoughtful during a pandemic. And I just feel like we really do need to write that down in the plan somehow. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Jacobs. Other questions or comments from commission members?
Mr. Karish, I have one question.
Go ahead.
From staff. It's a great question what Mr. Wilson and Ms. Smythe said. How does this affect any development agreements or already approved PUDs?
Sure. So in reference to, zoning that's on the ground or a development agreement that's on the ground, of course, those are all in effect. A plan does not change those in any way, shape, or form. So, in Cainhoy, they have not only the PUD that is in effect, but the development agreement that secures that. What we have in the plan are recommendations that are based on, 10 more years of knowledge now of what's going on with the elevations, what's going on with climate change, and they are substantial. And what we are showing there is, should there be an interest in changes to their development agreement, which would purely be on their end because they own the rights to that development agreement for the secured period of time it is in effect. But should there be interest in changes to it or their PUD, these are what we would recommend. And in general, I think they are very much following those. They're putting greater density along Clements Ferry, which is the highest elevation area out there. There are new apartment complexes going in right now in that development along Clements Ferry, so very much in keeping with that. And we give the development the city center designation, which is the most intense designation in this plan for the areas within a half mile of Clements Ferry Road for the length of their development. So right there alone, in that one little area, you could probably get all the density that they are interested in having for their entire PUD and development agreement. But we go further and still have other gradients of densities as you get away from Clements Ferry Road as well. But there is no doubt that there are areas, particularly on the southern side of the Cainhoy development or the Point Hope area, that will have impact from rising waters, marshes, things like that. And so what we are suggesting by virtue of these layouts is, should they choose to make modifications to their own PUD and development agreement, these are areas that probably they should be going to get away from the rising waters and the greater threat of marsh migration.
Okay, thank you, Christopher.
Thank you, Sunday and Mr. Morgan. Other questions, comments, and commission members? If not, I think, we've been here since 3, so we've been here for 2.5 hours, and we still have again, the key is this is a rough draft, so there's more to go. But I appreciate everyone's time today. Unless there's no other questions or comments, I guess we'll stand adjourned. I hope everybody has a good rest of the week and good Memorial Day weekend. Thank you.
You too, Charlie. Thank you.